Okay, sorry about that. So I'm going to start a fresh one now. Hopefully it'll be like part two. I made this Caruana-Carlsen round one, part two. Okay, so let's go back to this. And we were on knight to f8. So after knight f8, knight takes f6. That's what happened in the game. And he doesn't take it. He just moves his knight to e6 for Carlsen. Now, again, the computer was talking about how there's pressure on the F file, and there's this X-ray against F7. So, of course, you'd have to look at that, but it turns out there's nothing here. There are no effective discoveries or discovered attacks along the F file. And okay, he gave up the F pawn for Carlsen. He gave it to Caruana, but the knight is coming into F4. So we see, again, it's kind of like this this trade-off. So he's given white a little bit of pressure on the F pawn. Now, I don't even know if he had to give him the F6 pawn, but he is getting that super strong dark square control, and he's getting into F4, he's getting into D4 anytime he wants. It's just awesome control on the dark squares, and that's actually going to mitigate, again, the pressure on the F file. First, he had the bishop guarding F7. Now he's got a knight that's going to come in there, or something that's going to take the knight out if the bishop wants to take, which is going to weaken his dark squares further. So knight goes to H5. Well, he says, okay, can I get away scot-free with that pawn? Well, the knight goes to H5, and then, okay, finally the bishop takes it. But now he's kind of, I think what Carlsen has done is he's kind of gained a couple of tempos there, or tempi, I guess you want to use the Latin. So he has gained some time there by being able to bring the knight out. Okay, the knight on H5 had to take on F6, then go back, and then it gets taken. And again, there's this fragmentation of white's pawn structure. And now what I'm curious about, because again, I'm looking at this through two lenses. One is, let's analyze this actual game between Caruana and Carlsen, which was played on Friday. Oh, sorry, this one was Friday, round one. And number two is I want to analyze DecodeChess, kind of this further critique of DecodeChess. And again, I have this other video testing DecodeChess's groundbreaking explainable AI chess engine, or part one, part two. So this is part two of the second series on that, of going into the World Chess Championship and seeing how it does at that. So yeah, I would like to just do a few games like this throughout the championship. I thought round one was the most interesting so far. So now, of course, the knight comes in. And it's very annoying because, of course, there's an immediate threat of knight takes H3. If you get into H3, well, then you're going to fork the king and the rook, and you're going to pick up, again, we're getting into this question of winning the exchange, of winning a rook for a knight or a bishop. Rooks are worth, for those who are newer to chess, rooks are worth approximately 5 points, or 5 pawns value, and knights and bishops are worth approximately 3. Now, again, that's most things in chess, when we talk about it, like in theory, it's a rule of thumb, but it's something that can guide us at least. So, you know, all else being equal, you don't want to just give up a knight for a rook, a rook for a knight, or a rook for a bishop. But sometimes it's good if you can get something in compensation. So in this case, the bishop does take it, and the g-pawn takes. So I was curious, well, is it better to take back with the bishop or the g-pawn? I think just common sense would say that taking with the g-pawn, although it temporarily blocks the bishop on this nice diagonal, it does open something else. So you kind of, again, it's a little trade-off, give and take. You end up opening up the g-file, which is very uncomfortable for white's king. So not only is his own pawn structure fragmented, but the g-file is opened up. And also you can see this, again, this further clamping of the dark squares, which could be seen if this bishop ever gets to d4. Well, that's nasty. That bishop getting to d4, pinning the rook to the king, winning the exchange, and the knight couldn't even block because the pawn's there. So the pawn is kind of actually, even though it's temporarily blocking the bishop, tactically in the long run, it might actually help the bishop with other things on this diagonal, technically from a7 to g1. So after rook goes to g2, sensible enough that Caruana wants to start to control the file, but as it turns out, he can't, challenge the file with both of his rooks, because this bishop is going to go to d4, and you're going to win one of the exchanges, right? You're going to win a rook for the bishop. So what happens is let's go back to this move. So after g takes f4, now it says, the best line, interestingly enough, is what it thinks, using the open source chess engine, so-called chess engine Stockfish, is to do rook takes f4. So to give up the exchange, is benefit. Wow, look at that. And it has all these ideas as to why rook takes f4 is beneficial. It says, and we can expand any one of them if we want to. So it sacrifices the rook in order to decoy the black bishop. Okay. Well, you get rid of the black. You would get rid of the black bishop, yeah, which is a strong piece. That's black's strongest piece, pound for pound, for sure. That bishop, allowing rook g4. Well, if you don't take it, I'm going to g4, sure, and clog up that g file, which would be good for white. As Art of Defense in Chess by Soltis goes into that, like clogging up open lines as a defensive strategy. Captures the black pawn. Okay, good. Yeah, that's an obnoxious pawn. You get rid of it. Escapes black's bishop's threat. Bishop e5 to d4. Well, that's kind of funny. It says it escapes the bishop's threat of going to f4 to win you, but it escapes it by just saying, hey, let's just get it over with now and just take me. Now, if computers could get to that level of, of like showing its sort of the circular nature there, that would be interesting. So after rook e2 to f4 to f3, allows playing rook f8 check. Okay, what? Rook f4 to f2 to f4? Oh, sorry. So it was saying it was already on f2, then going to f4, then going back to f3, and then going to f8. Okay, I don't know. That's a bit wonky. That's a bit. So again, I think in terms of a critique, sometimes it's a little extraneous. So it can kind of again pierce. What's the word? Pierce the fog, or prune the tree. Prune the tree. Get it a little more efficient. We don't need some of those redundancies. It's not easier said than done, but it's a process. And then rook f2 to f4 to f3 to f8 allows playing queen takes f. Okay, it's looking again. It was taking some line, right? So it has some super long line where, like, in that line, it ends up getting in. Okay, allows playing rook f5. Yeah, it would like that. It would like to go to f5 and enables the other rook to take on f4. Is better than the alternatives because queen g2. It says the black has queen d7. But why is it better? Oh, because that pawn is just sort of falling almost. I mean, because you can't go king h2. That would be awful. If you go king h2, then you run into this discovered check by the bishop, and you have to give up your rook anyway in that line. I was thinking there might be, was there like a rook f3 possibility? But that rook is just an awful piece. It reminds me of a game that I saw recently. I forget what it was, but where the rook is just really awfully placed in front of the pawn. And it was actually from a game in How to Reassess Your Chess by Silman. It was from a game, I think it was a Botvinnik game, where, speaking of exchange sacrifices, so where black has sacrificed the exchange, and then white ends up having to babysit the pawn, blockading the pawn with his rook, but the rook is not the best blockader, therefore it shows you why the knight is a better blockader than a rook, because he has no scope. He's terrible. He guards a pawn, okay. His sole duty in life is to defend a measly pawn on h3. That's not so good, right? Okay, so let's look at plans. I'm always curious about plans and how the computer, if a computer can actually tell us something so abstract as planning. So after, no, it's more like just moves. It says after rook takes f4, white can respond to bishop takes with queen takes. Now that's not long-term planning. That's immediate in, described in human language that we can understand using English. So concepts. Should be a lot of concepts here. The rook now this is if we're taking on f4. Let's see. The rook at d8 can move to g8 and guard g6. Well, we can even infiltrate, penetrate. If you go to g8. Then you can get to g6 and I'm sorry. Oh, to guard the square g6, or you maybe even get into g3, but also g6. Yeah, potentially, if you're worried about something getting in there. White can play knight e3. Oh, if he gets rid of the pawn, he can play knight e3. Okay. So again, this is all like justifications for just getting rid of that annoying pawn on f4. White can play rook f3. White uses the open g file, and white can play king g2. That looks a little sketchy. I mean, yeah, you can. Well, at least you don't have to worry about the pawn ramming forward and checking you. But I'm a little afraid. I mean, the king just sitting out there, he's going to get checked anyway. So he's going to have to run to h1 or something. But with that queen maneuvering to take, yeah, like I said, it's dangerous. So in terms of concepts, like as a human, how I would explain it is, to contrast it, I would say something like, again, black has really strong control of the dark squares. Black has a lot of pressure on the g file. The white king is super exposed. The white pawns have become fragmented. The pawn on f4 is a thorn in white's side. In terms of relative king safety, the black king is way safer. Well, again, going to Jeremy Silman's How to Reassess Your Chess, you want to look at imbalances. So the king being able to tuck away in this like nice little cave of pawns, little cocoon, that's much better than this, right? So relative king safety is one of the key features. Difference in minor pieces. Black has, again, dark square control enabled by having that bishop that is uncontested that white doesn't have. Meanwhile, white has a knight, which is pathetic at the moment, honestly. It's not doing anything, which is why I talked about trying to get to c4 or something, but you can't because it's sort of corralled by the bishop at the moment. But yeah, I want to see a little bit more conceptualization there. But it's getting better. I think it is getting better, and it's very useful in some of these lines. Let's jump. Let me just check. Are we still live? Offline? Okay. Apparently I'm offline. That's weird. Let's see. It says I'm streaming. That's really annoying. Am I just I should have just stayed on and had that awkward stream to begin with. Is it working or not? Yeah, it says no one's viewing now. So it must not be going offline. Start your encoder. I did start my encoder. You know, I should probably like. Okay, sorry about that. We had some technical difficulties. So now part 2 of the analysis of Caruana-Carlsen round 1 using this explainable AI DecodeChess software. So, which is actually, you can get a free trial of it if you go on DecodeChess.com. So let me just make sure. Are we actually going now? Is it live again? Yeah, I don't know what it is. Something with, okay, I said stream now. Really weird. Yeah, we don't want that. No, we don't want that one. That was the dud. Delete that one. Yes. And that's one we want. Well, that was part 1. And let me just see, are we going? Are we live? Live streaming? Yeah, now it's live. Okay, good. Is it green? Yeah, we're green. Okay, cool. So let's start fresh. Yeah, I don't know. Sorry, it's not an ideal transition between 2 videos, but technical difficulties. Okay, let's go back. So after knight f8, so we talked about how oh, I'm sorry, no, this was the second knight f8. We were on a little farther down, and now we're talking about after the knight took, he gives him the pawn on f6, and it shows you the pressure on the f file. The knight took, and then the knight comes into e6. This was an interesting choice, to just give up the pawn on f6, but to gain a little bit of time, because the knight's coming into f4, and we're clogging up the f file anyway for Carlsen. It's clogging up Caruana's f file, so he can't get to that bishop on f7. And he's going to still continue to have that grip on the dark squares. And the knight going to h5, yeah, it's going to have to go back to h5 eventually. So he does it immediately, and of course Carlsen chops it off. Pawn takes back, and the knight comes in and just clogs it up. Bishop takes, and then we were looking at g takes f4, right? So with g takes f4, now I was wondering why the pawn took and not the bishop, but I think it's pretty clear that you gain a lot of advantages by taking with the pawn. Just looking at your scope of your pieces. Now you have blocked the bishop. That's the one drawback. Now again, there's a lot of trade-offs in this game. So the one trade-off is you're blocking your bishop here, but you're opening up the g file here, so you can access the king. Pretty self-explanatory, and also the bishop going to d4. So the knight can't really reach e3 because the pawn's on f4. It will get taken now. So now the threat is actually to go to d4 and pin the rook to the king. Now, just for those who are newer to chess, we don't know about winning the exchange. So winning an exchange is if you win a rook or a minor piece, which would be a knight or a bishop. So minor pieces are 3 points or 3 pawns value. Rooks are approximately 5 pawns value. Now, it's not a hard and fast rule, but it's just kind of so you have something to go by when making those decisions on whether or not you should trade pieces or not. So now you're gaining some things. You're increasing your clamp on the dark squares, And what does it talk about? Now, it says that the best line for white is to take on f4. So I think actually we'd have to run an analysis of after bishop takes f4, and then it'll tell us what it thinks is the best move for black in response. So we're going to decode that. Sorry, his rook for the bishop and gaining the pawn on f4. So giving up the exchange for the pawn. So technically that would be like losing a point, right? You give up 5, but you gain 3 plus 1, getting a pawn plus a bishop. So it wants rook takes f4, bishop takes, queen takes. Oh, even going into an endgame. Interesting. Can this be good for him, for white? Rook trades. He takes. Rook takes. I don't know. I mean, 3, 4, 5, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. I mean, temporarily anyway, Caruana as white would have gained 2 pawns for the exchange, although these pawns aren't much. It's kind of like 1 pawn. It's not doing much. The question really is whether this rook can infiltrate white's camp. If you can infiltrate with that rook, you're going to defeat the knight pretty easily. I mean, not to mention a king, just finding a path for your king to invade, but c3 will probably be played to cut that off. Yeah, so given that there's no infiltration point, it's not so easy. Pay attention to, so this will be going back to beginning of the line. So after g takes f4, it says pay attention to the rook at d8 can move to g8 and guard g6. Well, just in case g6 comes under attack, you can shift to g8. Also, you could come into g3 and double up or something. And h3 is weak. Does it talk about that? Queen at d2. It's really focused more on f4 right now. Opponent intentions. That would be for black. So the black bishop at e5 can maneuver to d4. So it can go to d4. Oh, that's nice. It gives you some arrows as well. So go to d4 and take on f2. And again, create that pin, and now the knight can't block. So that pawn is really a thorn in white's side there. The white pawn at c2 supports the pawn on d3, and the pawn on d3, by extension, supports the pawn on e4. A nice, what we call a pawn chain. Black can play rook dg8 check to prevent rook takes f4. Well, I mean, if you're in check, you can't take, but yeah, I'm not sure what it means by that. What is it saying? Oh, if you play bishop d4, well, you certainly couldn't take, because then you would be pinned. And rook dg8 check, and white cannot play rook takes f4 because you're in check. Yeah, okay, we get it. But the main thing that's more important is that black is getting pressure on the g file against the now exposed white king. From a strategic positional perspective, that's more relevant right now. And it says the black rook at d8 can maneuver rook g8 to g5. Yeah, I kind of like that. It can go to g8 to g5 or g3, of course. I would prefer g3 and then hit h3. And you can gang up on the h3 pawn with the queen as well. Just really pile up there, and that would be good for black. Let's look at plans. Queen take. Okay, it really wants to take on f4. Okay. That's not really long-term plan. I want to see more of that again. My original critique from here, that was one of the things I was talking about, doing a bit more long-term planning, abstraction, like sacrifice. But there was a moment in this game where it gets into sacrifice. Oh, let me just double check. Is it still working? Yeah, it's green now. Okay, good. And I think whoever was watching before, I think I lost them. They said, yeah, the chat is gone now, but we started a fresh one. Sorry about that. Whoever was watching, sorry about that. So we have white can play knight e3 if he gets rid of f4. And he can play king h1. Of course, get the king out of harm's way. That would be good. Okay. Does it talk about the h3 pawn? That's really important here. Now, I might say king g2 to talk about defending it. What's that? No, it doesn't get into that. That is a pertinent point, though. It should talk about how h3 is a weakness and black wants to attack h3, but it's more about the dark squares that are under threat. Okay. So next move after. Oh, is it done? Yeah, it finished. So after bishop takes f4. Now let's see. So for black, summary. So it does say the best line is g takes f4. It's good because it prevents taking the black prevents taking the black bishop at e5. Oh, so well, it doesn't want white to take the bishop at e5, so of course you have to capture it, and it captures the white bishop. Straightforward. But I want to know, in terms of like a cost-benefit analysis, what would make taking on f4 better than, you know, with the pawn better than taking with the bishop. Well, there you go. It's better than the alternative. What does it say? Queen c3. It doesn't explain anything, but it gives us a line. Let's see if there's anything in that line that might indicate why we might not like this. I mean, you're getting the exchange in this line as well. He didn't have to give it to you. He could have gone knight e3 and blocked it, but he could give up the exchange there too. Pay attention to the white rook at f4 protects the king by guarding g4 if it takes f. Yeah. Let's see. The black queen is threatened at d6. What's that? After queen takes. Well, yeah, if you hang your queen. Okay, that's not relevant unless you're like a very, very beginning player. That's good to know that you don't want to lose your queen. And again, I don't think it doesn't claim to be like for master level players. This is supposed to be for, I think, beginner to intermediate level players. So we'll be fair and treat it as it is, you know, as it's intended. Opponent intentions. White can play bishop h2. And let's go back to this original position we're looking at. So it's saying that white can play bishop h2. Oh, again, that's getting. So when it's talking about like a direct tactic, like, you know, something is under attack, we have a trade or something, it doesn't do so much of the strategy. So it's just talking about like, well, if you don't take me, I'm going to run with my bishop to h2, and you're going to lose your knight for free, for nothing, right? Plans. Let's see what it says. No, yeah. So that's not the best move for any of that. It's just pure moves more, because it's just a pure tactical situation. So after g takes f4, which says is the best move, then we have rook g2 taking the g file. Magnus contests the g file. Queen e2, rook takes, queen to e6. Okay, this is important. So with this move, there's a couple of things that are going on. Well, first of all, you're aiming at h3. Now, this is where h3 becomes pertinent, and that's why I wanted the computer to tell us that earlier. But we also have rook g8 coming. Does it say, says black has a small advantage now? White should beware of black playing rook g8. Well, why? Let's see, because you're going to win the queen. Because the queen is in front of the king, we would get a pin. Now the queen is able to defend that rook coming to g8. So, of course, white needs to do something about it, which in the game he does, which is knight f2. And then you intend to play knight g4, which will obstruct that file. So when the rook comes in, you block it, and the h-pawn guards. Now, let's look at what else we have here, what else it says. That's pretty straightforward. So there's a direct threat, and we stop. What about h3, though? I think the thing is that h3 is not immediately under threat, but it is a permanent weakness, as well as h5, and it comes under fire a bit later. Pay attention to the rook at d8 can move to g8, even to g3. Yeah, that's when it will hit G. So when it goes to G3, that's when it's going to hit H3. Doesn't mention it. There we go. The white pawn is threatened at H3. We're putting pressure on it. There we go. That's important. So for instance, if you ever move your queen away, well, just, you know, if you don't know what your opponent's looking at, and you just move your queen away to E2, well, you're going to lose that. And actually, yeah, now you're in some trouble. Well, the queen can block, but it's not good. Actually, no, if you block with the queen, well, yeah, you're getting checkmated now. Queen takes, queen has to block, and queen takes with the checkmate. There we go. And what else do we have? The rook at d8 can move to g8 and capture the queen at g2. Yep. See? Black bishop is threatened at e5. Threatened? Well, not really. If the knight goes to f2 and g4, it can look at it, but not yet. It's going to be threatened based on some line that it comes up with. So you let the knight go to g4, And you make the worst move. Wait. Well, after the king moves out of the way. He takes it, king moves, and, well, you can trade. But actually, that wouldn't be so good because when he takes it, and then the queen takes back, well, now you've lost your protection on E5, on F4 because the E5 bishop is gone. And now white's actually doing fine, I think. We have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 against 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So white's up a pawn. His king is still not ideally posted, but it should be kind of better than what he had in the game anyway for Caruana. And it says the black queen at E6 protects the king by guarding G8. Well, it's more that, yeah, right, you don't let the queen take the rook, but it's more that you're protecting the rook to attack the king. More of a defensive posture. Sorry, offensive, not defensive. Opponent intentions. The black rook at D8 can maneuver, so we can have, wow, that's a lot of arrows. So we can have rook G8 takes G2, takes C2. Well, yeah, I mean, if you get to clean the house, that would be cool. But just knowing your possibilities. Okay, let's get a little deeper then into the game. So we have queen E6, and then knight F2. That was necessary if he wants to clog up the file. So what happened was the rook didn't have time to contest the G file again, because if the rook ever went up to F2, he would have been hit by bishop D4. So he can never really get there. So the knight instead is hoping to just clog things up. But now what happens is the H5 pawn is just indefensible. So this pawn is going to fall, and how do you attack it? Well, he just drops its queen back. And after the queen moves, he just takes it. So we still have a problem on H3. The queen guards it, but we also have pressure on G4. And I think what he wants to do is move the queen and play H5. And he's just threatening to, move the queen away, move the H5 pawn, and attack the pinned piece. We say pin it and win it. I think that's what he wants here for Carlsen. But you can see his advantage is pretty big here, I think. Actually, where are we? The computer doesn't agree, actually. The computer says right here is where it starts to really shift. So something, but I still think, like, from a human perspective, even though, like, okay, maybe white can play perfectly at this point, we see about parity, and maybe white can play perfectly and not give black any advantage. But given all these advantages we've been talking about, the pressure on the G file, this thorn of a pawn on F4 that maybe white should have taken, the bishop on E5 that has pressure on the dark squares, and so forth, then and the exposure of the king compared to this nice king, which can be tucked away, nice and safe. So I think we see this real advantage for black. And as we see, Caruana doesn't play like a machine, although sometimes he does, but it's hard to defend really well, especially when being under pressure from the world champion, and his position here begins to deteriorate. So king F2, and then now, so this is why I wanted to do this, because I see here that there's really a shift in the evaluation. So what I wanted to do was see, okay, what's responsible for that? Kind of like you see here, it's like the market tanks. Okay, why did the market tank? What were the factors that led to that, right? So after king F2, we have bishop C. Well, that's what happened in the game. So it's giving what it thinks is the best line. And again, I think we'd have to go back to the move before king F2. So if you're using DecodeChess and you want to know what you should do, then go to the move prior to that move, queen takes H5, and then it'll tell you how you should react to that, or what it thinks you should do. So then it says why bishop C7 is good, because it escapes the pressure from the knight. Yeah, then once he takes this, well, he's threatening to just take it, queen takes, and then pick up that pawn on F4. Oh, after he moves the king, sorry. Then he would take on F4. So that pawn's going to be very loose. And he wants to play king B7. I like that. Again, he's kind of talking about like this prophylactic ideas, these safety moves, which are more advanced concepts. And it enables bishop takes E5. Oh, if the knight comes in. Some random line if the knight hangs itself on E5. Plans. Does it have anything? Why king B7? White can play knight takes E5. Oh, it's saying, well, you can't play king B7 now because then white's going to take on E5, and white gets, as I mentioned, going to take this pawn and getting equality. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 3, 4, 5, 6. Yeah. And this pawn is very loose. We call it a loose pawn. So yeah, white is doing just fine. Much better than the game, which was similar in structure, but the exclusion of the knight and the bishop really benefited white here. So that bishop on e5 was just really advantageous for black here. So we see the superior minor piece of the bishop over the knight. Not always superior, but in this game it was. And again, that's me kind of giving more insight to this game, but I think I would like the computer. The computer's giving us the lines and some ideas, but I would like the computer to start talking about, the minor piece battles. The bishop has more flexibility, more scope than the knight, things like that. After king b7, then we get king e1, and then we can win the pawn on e5 if he does that. So, okay, well, it's talking about king b7 in the context of white trying to push, clear the queen in order to win the c6 pawn and break into black's position and get a bunch of counterplay. But not only that, it's just that it's nice and tucked away as a prophylactic sort of safety measure. It's nice chess vocabulary, right? Okay, so concepts. Queen h5 can take the pawn at h3, or at least it's looking to take it if white gives him the opportunity to do so. Black uses the b8 h2 diagonal. Definitely, and the other diagonal from h8 to a1. Black can play h5, which is, that's what he did in the game. The knight at g4 can take it to bishop. So it's kind of like just going through every pertinent point in this position, just breaking it down. What are all the things that matter here? And again, my critique sometimes has been there's just like a bunch of stuff that some of it, I would like to see a prioritization. So ideally, the most important thing could be up here, and things that matter less can be down here, but let's see. Maybe it did do that. Now that's important, like the fact that black uses the open G file, that's up there. Queen G5, as he did in the game, to play H5 and increase that dark square pressure and just gain access or gain control of the G file after H5 is played. It's kind of like opening up the, it's like opening up the pipes, the water flows down the G file, okay? The floodgates open. The white queen at f3 x-rays the black queen at h5. True. So when you take the knight, or you do anything with this, when the knight takes the bishop, you'd be looking at the queen. White can play king f3 if he moves his queen, blockade the pawn potentially. Well, that's the advantage of having the knight. So there's no knight that can attack the king on f3. But if black had a knight, he'd be able to jump over that and hit the king. So there is that. e4 pawn can move to e5 and control the square f6. Yeah, I guess. Go to e5 and maybe jump the knight into f6. Some lines that it's looking at there. Okay, let's go forward. So Carlsen goes to c7. Or maybe I'll just say Magnus. So Magnus goes to c7. Bobby goes to e2. And again, he moved his knight, bishop away from the knight. And the king is trying to get away from everything. But it shouldn't work. It shouldn't work for Bobby. I think Magnus should win this position, or at least be much better. Queen g5. But this is why it's really important here to look at those couple of key moves that Magnus could have done to win. So knight to h2, or at least get a massive advantage that he could have. I think he could have won that. So knight h2. Black has a decisive advantage, minus 2.2, meaning that that's like up almost a piece, up more than 2 pawns. A piece, like a knight, would be 3 points. But should beware of white playing queen g4 check. Right, we don't want to just trade queens, because if he goes here, he's going to trade queens and kind of get himself off the hook. Because without this queen, this king is in less peril. Queen e5 is good because it allows the rook at g8 to guard g4 by making way through g5. By making way. Let's see what it means by that. Queen e5, white cannot go queen g4. So, but maybe you should say like that it's trying to stop the queen trade to keep the aggressive queen on the board. Maybe it does. Let's see. I guess it can be inferred, but it's good to be explicit. So queen e5, queen g4 check. Okay, we win the queen. Allows queen c3. Right, that's important. So from an aggressive standpoint, not from here, from this position, we can infiltrate, right? So let's say they go here. That's nice. Rook gets in. and the queen gets in. Yeah, it's just kind of increasing the domination of the black pieces. And again, those dark squares, very nice. They're under his control. Not to mention h3 is really hanging now, and c2 is hanging. Yeah, that's a winning position if you start winning stuff like that. It makes way for the black rook through g5 to g3. So for instance, queen e5, if queen f2, rook infiltrates to g3, anchored in by the pawn on f4, knight f3, and then you get, again, that's nice. It's really a nice picture, aesthetically pleasing, seeing that rook on g3, queen on c3, nice pocket, nice holes for each one of them to reside in, because we call it a hole if there's two pawns that have moved from both sides. So the d3 pawn and the b3 pawn, they both have moved, so there's no dark square control. Pawns of the soul of chess, as Philidor said. If you make weaknesses in your position, your opponent will invade. So don't like move your pawn every other pawns at the beginning, because you're just going to create holes. Your opponent, if they know what they're doing, they're going to just infiltrate. And then we have another hole here because h3 moved, the pawn moved to f4, so g3 is a gaping hole, and the pawn anchors it in. And now, yeah, all these pawns are starting to fall. So, wow, lots of lines here. Supports queen b2. We could potentially even come into b2, yeah. Pay attention to the black rook at g8 protects the king by guarding g4. The rook at g8 protects the king by guarding g4. Yeah, there's a lot of connections made there. That's interesting. So how is the rook at g8 protecting the king by guarding? Oh, because of the direct line of queen g4 check. Okay, sure. We looked at that. The white king at Egypt, but there's a lot of interesting language in here, right? The way that they've programmed it. It's like, okay, so instead of just seeing some random lines and not knowing what to do about it, which is why I like this program, because some of my students, I work with them and they're like, hey, I don't know what this means. Okay, I see +3 or whatever, but why? And okay, it's not perfect yet, but it's getting pretty far along. So that's why I looked at this, and I've never like endorsed any product like this. I'm actually critical of AI, but in a lot of ways, just like a lot of those movies are, right? Those Armageddon scenarios. But no, not even for that sense, but just like privacy issues, things like that. But this is really interesting. So I do endorse it. I mean, I think it's good. I was critical, especially the first one, but I'm seeing some improvements, and I like it. I mean, it is thorough, definitely thorough. Functionality. So it's going to show you like all of the. Let's get back. Yeah, in this position. Just going to show you like all of the angles, the geometry of the position. So the black pawn at h6, it can move to h5. The white pawn at b3 can move to the guard. Oh, good. It guards the squares. I was like, it can move to b4. Yeah, it would get taken. It guards the square c4, so it's stopping black. We have two pawns stopping black from going to c4. He doesn't want to lose that. And the black king at c8, he can play king b7. And does it say that's going to tuck him away nice and safe? It would be nice. So I'd like to see a little language there. You could play king b7 where it will be at a safer location, away from the scope of the enemy pieces. Although it did talk about the queen going to g4. So again, we can kind of infer some of that concepts. Queen at g5 can capture the unsupported pawn at c2. Oh, yeah. Yeah, right. And I think that's what Magnus kind of missed. Because he seemed to be, well, they were at like what, move 38 or something? What move are they on? This is move after what? Move 34. So, well, they only had like 6 more moves left until the time control. So they were both getting kind of low on the clock. And by move 38, they were like down to the wire, I think. So you can't blame him for that. But, we'll give him a little break. But, he did miss that idea, I think, of shifting to the queen side with his queen. Well, he saw the idea that we're going to see where the queen is going to get behind the bishop, create the battery on the diagonal. But it does seem like he was fixated a lot on the G file, and he could have worked there earlier to get something out of it. But again, we can quibble about it. But he did play a really good game, I'll still say. And Fabiano defended really well to get out of that. Okay, so in terms of concepts, we had the white rook at f1 protects the king by guarding f2. True. So like if there's an infiltration, you can always come up and also you're guarding the knight on h2. And black can play h5, yeah. White can play knight f3, sure. The The white king at e2 can move to support the white pawn at c2. It can go to d2 guarding this, because you do need to really recognize this. You want to look at this position and recognize that, you know, it's not just about this. Sometimes what happens is you focus a lot on one part of the board, and your opponent will actually end up concentrating all their forces at that part of the board, which creates vulnerabilities elsewhere. So you see Capablanca, the famous world champion from Cuba in the early 1900s. What he would do a lot was he would call it was like a game literally called the left-right hook. So he would do that, and sometimes he would shift to the other side of the board, like his game against Treball in 1929, I think it was. And he'd shift to one side, and then his opponent's forces would all go there. Then he would go back. Then he'd be like, he might come back again too. But you can see like these are really vulnerable, and if you could just pick off one or two of these pawns, that would give you a lot more to work with, right? The white queen at f3 is threatened by the black rook. It's not threatened yet, but it could be if the rook gets in after queen e5. So the line would be that it's using to adjust. Wow, it's got a lot of lines. So let's look at this one. So queen e5, king moves back, and black can immediately attack it. And it looks like we're also going to pick off the h pawn very soon. Oh, they counterattack. Is that going to work? No, it can't work because you would just take it. They take, and then you pick up the rook for free. Okay, black's up a rook. Cool. Okay, so let's look at the next one. So we're back at 30. Wait, what move are we at? Was it 30? Oh, we're a little farther along, aren't we? Was it just 34? Yeah, not h2. Okay, then he does h5. So again, like I wanted to analyze this too because we're seeing, well, this was a bit of a dip. So it went from evaluation of, it stays there. I don't know. It went back to minus 1.42. So it seems like Magnus could have had a lot more than this. So it's saying he's hovering around being like up a value of up a pawn now, approximately. So why is it like, what could he have done that was better? And again, I think after knight h2, does it say what the best line is? Yeah, that was queen e5, right? So now we know queen e5 was the improvement over h5, and that would have given him something like a minus 2.2 advantage rather than a 1 point something advantage. Now it says black has a big advantage, but not decisive. So it looks like he could have snagged it there, but he's still doing really well. Now he has another chance coming up. So rook f2, queen infiltrates, reasonable. And now, I mean, look, the advantage is still quite big. I mean, we're at minus 1.4. I wouldn't mind having minus 1.4 here. In round one with the black pieces against, you know, the world championship match. I mean, he's looking to come out with a win in round one. That's good. Now, h4, that seemed to be a mistake. So the evaluation shifted way back. So he goes from, you know, being up over a pawn in evaluation to just having a, you know, a reasonably sized advantage, but not huge. So only a small, oh wow, now it's actually, so minus 0.79 is how much the evaluation shrunk, you know, minimized his advantage. So now he's at minus 0.4. White should be aware of black playing king b7. Okay. So sorry. So after h4 we have, for example, e5. So it thinks this is the best line for white. And then, so the idea is that, I think it said beware of king b7, no? Because king b7 would be the one that would protect c6. I think that's why it mentions it. Rook goes to g5, attacking the pawn. Knight goes to d2, and rook takes it. I mean, that looks pretty good. But does white really need to play e5? Can he just try to hold on here without giving him the e5 pawn? Well, it says it prevents the bishop from supporting the f4 pawn. Okay. And it threatens to take on f4. But that's only temporary, isn't it? So it's saying, for example, e5, rook g5, knight d2, rook takes check, knight blocks, and if queen c1, well, that looks pretty dangerous. I mean, you're attacking c2 now. Then he says queen takes f4. This is a really complex line because now you're going to kind of look at, okay, I take you, you take me, I take you. I mean, once you take on c2, you're going to be really weakening d3. Maybe he just holds on in there, but it's certainly not fun for white with that exposed king. So this is what I would call a very much silicone line. You know, this is the computer beasts line, right? That he comes up with. So so it's saying that white would have a big advantage if he gets to take on f4, but he has to give up the. I mean, he got to take it for free, but he's got to give up the e pawn to do so. Concepts. Black uses the g file. The queen x-rays the black pawn. Oh, that's why it's talking about e5, right, to get c6. White uses the a8 to h1 diagonal. Okay. The queen at g1 can cap. Well, I don't think we want to take the rook at f2, but it's looking at f2 and f1. You never know, maybe in some lines. White can play king d2 and kind of guard the. Well, here's the problem with his position, though, for white, is that he wants to come over here with this king to protect the pawns. But then the bishop comes in, and he's got these dark squared weaknesses. It's kind of like in a dragon where white would castle queenside into this, you know, into the bishop attack. Well, the bishop would be like on g7, but the bishop can shift to that diagonal. And he's committed those weaknesses with b3. So if he had like a pawn on b2 and a pawn on c3, I can see the king being a bit more comfortable in a situation like that. And what else do we have? Yay. d8, h2 diagonal. Just talking about different lines that are under pressure. Black can play again that king 7 move. But really the relevant point here is that, yeah, earlier on that queen should have gone to e5 to immediately exploit those weaknesses on the dark squares. But again, he was in time pressure. So he comes in here, and but he can't get anywhere else. So it's a tough position. Oh, you know what he had, though? He did have something. He did. So after this move, after we are on h5, rook goes to, and maybe this is what he had in mind. After queen g1, knight f1, h4. So I think he had in mind this rook sacrifice, sacrificing the exchange by going here, letting the knight take it. But he never ended up doing it. And what are we on? We're on move 36. So we still have 4 more moves to go. Now h4, it says that he should, so white should play e5 again, is what the computer likes. I mean, it is kind of scary to make a move like that, though, because, you know, from a human perspective, again, the computer looks like super long lines that's investigating in this crazy calculation tree of millions of moves, right? But after e5, then, you know, you're going to be opening up the center, and you have to worry about weaknesses over here. So it's kind of like, where does the white king seek refuge? So from a practical standpoint, I do think that white still has a lot of problems here. Now after king d2, king b7, so he's kind of realizing that he has weaknesses on the dark squares, and he's trying to shore those weaknesses up. Well, where did he miss the opportunity to bring his rook to g3? Let me see. Could he have done it already? So he does, right after h4, we had king d2, king b7. Now, could he have done rook g3 here? Let me try. I think we could do the engine. We would go stockfish. So we can see anytime you want, you can just run the evaluation. Now it does like king. It does think that's the best move. So king b7 was played, and then c3, and then he goes bishop e5. Now, how do we see for the current position? Yeah, that's it. That's it. So this is where it thinks that Magnus could have gone rook g3, just sunk his rook in there. And again, that reminds me of that Botvinnik game, where Botvinnik sacrifices the exchange, as Silman talks about. But he gets a passed pawn, protected passed pawn. He gets that really nice dark square control. So what I think we might want to do is, rather than, so when he plays bishop e5, I think we would want to do, or what we could do is we can just go rook g3, and you can test it out, and if you want to analyze it, you'd press decode, and we could come back to this one. Now, where is it going to go? somehow it's going to show up right under the decodes. And it says black has a decisive advantage, and then it's going to get into, you know, the language behind it. You see it, the bar, it's doing its analysis here. But it says it's beneficial because it prevents taking the white queen to F. Captures the. Oh, knight takes G3. Oh, but see, then it's going to give you the best line for white to do in response. But really, we want to see what's the best line for black to do. And so we'd have to. So again, we'd have to decode C3, and we'll come back to that. So he does bishop E5, but this is where that blunder came pretty soon. A blunder because it gave, not because it lost the game, but because it shrunk his advantage so substantially. So after king C2, now that was, it looks like, well, queen G7 was the best line. Knight goes to H, so he's creating the pressure on C3. Knight comes out. Now it looks like the knight's just going to come out to G4 and claw, and it's like, well, maybe it was a mistake to go H4 and F4 because now you've created, for you know, Magnus has created a weakness on G4 that Caruana gets to sink into with his knight and clog everything up. But it turns out, I think all he'd have to do is, instead of bishop takes C3, I think it was queen G1. So taking here was premature because, well, again, white really wanted that F4 pawn, and that's going to allow him to come to F7 and trade queens and go into an endgame, which, although it's still better for Magnus, it enables Caruana, who's a very good defender, to get the draw, be close enough to drawing. Whereas in the other line, so, well, what's the best move though? Bishop takes C3. It doesn't like comment on that move though. So yeah, I think we would have had to analyze knight H2. But yeah, I'm pretty sure if we run the analysis here, I'm pretty sure queen G1 was very, very strong for Carlsen. Well, it's still only saying like -1, but I think it's going to get a little bit bigger than that. And so if we go queen G1, for example, we can just test it out ourselves. We don't have to just say, okay, give me the lines. I mean, this is what I would do on my own. I mean, when I'm analyzing games, I'll kind of tinker with the lines using Stockfish for free on leadchess.org or using Komodo or something like that. And so after queen to G1, let's say the knight goes back to stop the queen from getting to A1. The knight might go to F1. And then, now it's saying B5. So similar to I saw some recommendations earlier about B5 to B4 ideas to crack open those dark squares. But still, I mean, it's not as good as Carlsen could have had because that knight on F1, it's hampering the queen. I mean, she still can't really get anywhere. But that rook on G3, yeah, the rook on G3 is going to be able to come in some of those lines. And I think that's the strength, yeah. And especially now that C3 has been played, you know, when you come in, you're looking at D3 in some lines as well, and H3. So the knight kind of feels obliged to take it. But let's look at that line, actually. So did it finish it? We were looking at the decodes. So, oh yeah, rook G3. Yeah, oh right. We did that move one, but then it didn't really tell us any alternatives. But right, it did tell us the best response to it, which would be knight takes G3. And let's just see why it's good though. So we'll hide that. And after knight takes G3, here, H takes G3. But yeah, it's giving black a decisive advantage here. So rook attacks the queen, let's say, and then B1, queen B1. But that A2 pawn's in trouble now, and you can't move the A pawn or else you drop the B pawn. So we've given up the exchange, but look what we've got. I mean, the bishop guards this pawn, which guards this pawn. So we have two connected pass pawns, which are, you know, tying these two pieces down. They can't do anything. Meanwhile, the queen's roaming in white's position. The pawns are falling. The bishop is still strong, and the king is super safe. So very, very strong position for black here. So after, for example, D4, we take with check. King goes back, take again, and then they take on C5, and then you get queen A3 check. King moves up, check again, and then take back. And well, you could just imagine this pawn could run down too, and you got these two passed pawns. The king is exposed. Yeah, it's not a pleasant position. It's not going to be easy to win this position for black, but we can say there's a ton of compensation for the exchange, and I would definitely rather be playing with the black pieces here when you have all the play, and the white king is a target, basically. Okay, so now we are on, I think, the knight h2. Go back to that, and then we had bishop takes e3. So again, he still should have tried queen g1, although it wouldn't have necessarily been decisive. Let me just make sure it's actually still working. Yeah, it is working. Okay, and cool. It says it's green, so hopefully it all gets recorded. And then we have, yeah, after the queen takes, so then the bishop just comes to d4, and you can really see the advantage being minimized here. Sorry, after this position. And so the rook's under attack, but the queen just trades. King moves. Now, if the queen took it and you take back, then the problem is, say you move. Now the knight's able to go to g4, and it actually blocks the rook from coming in. So it's actually advantageous here for black to not take the queen and just move the king away right away to safety on a6. Although you don't really, in an endgame that's coming, you don't really want your king too far to the side, though. You want to centralize. Unless he can invade here, which I don't think he can. And then the queen takes, and it still looks good for him, for Carlsen. I mean, he still has an advantage here. But you can just see it from going from near winning positions, and it could have even been better than that, going back to minus 0.4, like a slight advantage for him. It's not what he wants. And even if it's more of a nominal advantage here, it's kind of not in reality. So after rook goes to e2, then rook g3, well, it's like, okay, you're going to win the h-pawn. Oops, sorry, I pressed the down button. So we finally got into h3. Now you should have, or sorry, g3. You should have gotten in g3 earlier when it was as a sacrifice. Now you get into g3, attack the pawn on h3, but suddenly, I didn't see this coming, how strong it was. But when he gets this pawn running to e5, it's really difficult. So the knight first comes here, and the rook takes, and then the pawn goes to e5, and it's very strong. And now you can see black has a small advantage, but should beware. Yeah, of course, beware of white playing e6. And now it said that rook f3 was rook f3. It says it diminishes advantage slightly, but I mean it still says it was the best move that it could come up with for Carlsen in this position. So we have rook f3. You got to just run back and stop the pawn. And this was interesting. So the rook came back and then blockaded the pawn. And then Caruana finds a nice maneuver. He moves his knight here. And then Carlsen throws away his h-pawn. But basically they end up trading pawns because they both throw away their pawns. But Caruana holds on to this pawn, hits the bishop. Then the bishop comes back and hits the pawn. So now no matter what, you're basically going to be able to sacrifice this pawn and take this one. Here's the way it works. So he goes a3. Magnus starts to push over here. And then Caruana says, okay, I'm going to stop you in your tracks with b4. And it says, okay, c takes b4 is beneficial because it takes the pawn and prevents the pawn from taking you. You kind of have to take it. Or I guess king b6 is an option. But no, it's not. It's not, because it might be. Let me see. No, what would be wrong with king b6? Are there some lines where the king is vulnerable there? If you were to go to king b6, then we have to press the stockfish button again. Yeah, I was thinking you might get in some trouble. So the knight comes into d6, and then he's threatening the rook, and if the rook takes, oops, then he gets a fork, and he picks up the rook. Yeah, so that doesn't work. But after b4, you just trade it down, takes back, and then he's able to take on e7, and again, he sacrifices the rook, but the rook can't even take it, because then he would take his rook, knight takes, and you run with the pawn. So the knight takes, okay, then you sacrifice your pawn, you decoy the rook, and okay, of course, you're threatening to get a queen, so he has to deal with it, and then you take it back, and then we ended up in this position that that Fabian was able to draw. And I was thinking, okay, are there any points at which Fabi could have gotten, or Magnus could have gotten a win here? And I don't know. I mean, the evaluation didn't shift, so I was curious over here where there were some shifts in evaluation. Maybe, what were those better moves? So let's go to those. So we're going to go to decodes, and let's just look at least one or two of those. Then we'll wrap it up. So decodes. So we had King C7. I was curious about this one. Okay, so this one shifted a lot here. So let's see why that shifted so much. King B2. So we have this one, and we'll minimize that. Okay, so, and I think if you click on this too, it'll just pop up there. So after King B2, Black has a small advantage, but should be aware of White playing Rook H7 check. Well, not right now, but okay, so it's saying the best line is Rook G3, which is what he did. But yeah, it's not really saying that, if Caruana played the best move and if Magnus made the best move in response, it doesn't look like it's that critical. And yeah, I don't think there can't be enough to win here if it's minus 0.28. The White Rook can move at H8 and can move H7 to A7. So basically what it's saying is that pawn, that Rook could just be really annoying. You kind of start, maneuvering behind the scenes on the back rank and annoy these pawns. So that's really the problem in Black's position, is those pawns are so backward. The only way he can hope to win is if he can get another pawn, but it's just not enough. I mean, you can't get this pawn. He can't even really so easily play A5. If he can maybe play A5 and trade off these ones and then try to get his king in, but anytime you move your king in, he just checks you from behind and you can't approach the pawn. So yeah, if you can trade one pawn and win the second pawn, and then you're left with two connected passed pawns, there are some scenarios where that works, but you just can't, not here. You just can't do it. And Fabi knew that, and he did well to set that up, where he created something of a fortress, where Magnus, no matter how good he is in endgames, he just didn't have enough to win in this position. It just wasn't objectively possible. So let's just look at this. We had, I mean, they just shuffled around, but I think really what it comes down to is there wasn't enough for Magnus to progress. King C2. Well, the evaluation after King C2 move 86, it went even closer to a draw at that point. After this move. So what was the improvement? Rook G1. No, it's saying that's the best line, I think. Let me see. After King C2. Yeah, but I think the computer just, it's not that Magnus's move was bad and caused his advantage to drop more. It's just that the computer realized, once to analyze that position at Rook G1, that there's just nothing here. So he's just not able to progress, and yeah, they ended up getting a draw. And you could look at the whole game if you want. Again, I pulled it up on 365chess.com or chessgames.com. But on 365chess.com, it was easier to just copy and paste this, which becomes a PGN. And I was able to copy it and paste it into the new game here to analyze it with you. And we'll just get to the end position after here. They shuffled around a bit. The rook goes back. And well, they ended up trading off one of the pawns. He did trade. No, what happened was, I think, this. Yeah, he didn't get to take the B pawn. I think it would have been better if he could have taken the B pawn with the A pawn. But I think Caruana took the A pawn and Magnus took the D pawn, and he couldn't get to the B pawn. And if he ever pushes, if he ever does this move, you just take it, and you can't make this king move. That's the problem. The king is going to be in front of the pawn, and that's what we know from Luciana's position, that if the king is able to get in front of the pawn, the defending king, you can't win. But if the attacking king can get in front of the pawn, then you're able to maneuver with your rook in such a way, in some situations, where you can force the king out and force him to stay away, and you can shelter your king using your pawn to get a queen. So check out Lucena's position, but here it's just not possible. And this will be closer to like not even Philidor's. You would use Philidor's position if you need to set up a block, like sort of stop the king from entering the 6th rank. But he's not even getting there, I don't think. So this is just a dead draw, and they both knew it, and they agreed to it. So hopefully that was helpful. Kind of a different angle on analyzing the first match, which was the first game of the match, which was really interesting, using DecodeChess. Yeah, so check out this site if you want, if you think it's interesting. And you can use your own games or just plug in Grandmaster Games, the World Championship match, and you can post a video yourself or let me know what you thought about it. All right.